The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody. Welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this, what is it? Saturday, February 22nd. Welcome to our AMA. And we, as always, have our panel here on Zoom, but you're also welcome to use YouTube and the Super Chat feature to ask any question you want. Not that you restrain yourself during other shows. So it's Ask Me Anything is kind of funny because you're asking me anything all the time. But this is truly, given that I'm not setting any topic, it truly is an opportunity to take the show wherever you want it to go. Yes, let's, let's just get rolling. Adam, I think you're on first. You're muted, Adam.
Yes, I was working at unmuting myself. Okay. As you know, the earliest classes from the Columbia School of Pragmatist Anti-Philosophy of Education at Columbia either went to become faculty at other colleges of education, or they were hired by the most expensive private schools to join their faculty. And Trump is a graduate of the first generation of Americans who were disminded by the pragmatist anti-philosophy of education. However, in the meantime, the majority of adult Americans have been through the same disminding process. And that's why they vote for Trump. That's why they cannot hold a coherent set of philosophical or political ideas in their heads. Now, other countries do not have this anti-philosophy of education. And so the question becomes, is it possible still to turn the US around? Or is it too late?
I have no idea. I don't know. I mean, the reality is that Ayn Rand saw the same phenomena 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So it's, you know, the educational system was rotten even before Columbia. She talks about the missing link is culturally appropriate to today, but she wrote it in the early 1970s. So it's worse today. Leonard Peikoff, after 9/11, said the American sense of life was dead. Ayn Rand said the sense of life was keeping us alive. Leonard said it was dead. I think it was 2004 in his Fort Hill Forum. I don't know. I don't know. I think the American sense of life has been distorted and perverted into Trumpism, which is an anti-American sense of life, but that's the pseudo-American sense of life. I don't know if it's too late. I have no idea. It's the processes by which cultural changes happen are complex and difficult. People still have free will. They still can change. More than half the country didn't vote for Trump. Of the people who voted, you know, he got a very small majority, very small. I mean, he keeps boasting it's a lot, whatever, largest, but it's still a very small majority. I don't know if it's savable. It's impossible to say. The revolution might start somewhere else. It might start in a different country, but it's not the case that the situation is much better in other countries. We'll see the German election tomorrow, where a party like the AfD, which is tolerant of Nazi sympathizers, will get 20% of the vote in Germany, which is scary. I just don't I don't know. I don't know what is possible where. We have to try. We have to keep fighting and see and change whomever's mind we can change, and then see what the results are afterwards. I still think you have more free speech here than certainly in Europe, in the United States. You still can emigrate into the United States legally easier than you can into most of Europe. And as bad as it is, it's interesting that the rejectors movement has relied so much on immigrants. And I think the American economy has relied a lot on immigrants and is going to continue to rely on immigrants because of the failure of the American education system is so bad that the Americans just can't hack it. So we rely more and more on immigrants, both intellectually and productively.
But pragmatism is just Kant on steroids. And the German educational system, once we get AfD, does the same job. Perhaps they have greater separation between politics and economics and
that's not true.
The STEM disciplines.
I mean, Germany doesn't have more separation of economics from state.
No, I mean, in the education system, they have separate education tracks for the STEM students.
Sure.
And for everybody else.
Sure, but Germany is dramatically behind in all the STEM fields. It's best people come to the United States. You have very few successful startups in Germany. In Germany, in many respects, its economy is starting to show this, is dying. Its economy is dying. And whether they can restructure it under the center-right government, we will see. Hopefully they can. But on current trends, Germany is in big trouble. Beyond the immigration issue, beyond the Islamist issue, just economically, pure economics. And the reality is they have no STEM. They have no startups. They have no tech industry to speak of. I mean, if I was going to bet on anybody in Europe, it would be Scandinavia is in much better shape than Central Europe is, and maybe Poland. Poland and Scandinavia are probably doing best. Thanks, Adam.
The Baltic countries are
but they're small.
They're
just not significant enough.
Yes.
Baltic countries, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia are all doing well, but they're just too small, and they could get run over by Russia in days if the West it fails as it seems to be doing. Okay, Ian.
Just as a quick side note, I am also suspicious about the other countries thing because I'm originally from Canada. And while I think the education system is a little better there are still a lot of people there that are just as broken in their thinking as Americans are. Let me put it that way. Lots of Trump fans where I'm from, sadly.
Yeah, because even though they don't have explicit, Trump fans on the one side and radical, socialist on the other side. I mean, Canada is quite socialist. A lot of people are socialists. So what you have is it's even if you don't get progressive education as bad as in the U.S., you're still getting bad ideas and you're still getting a bad education system. So there's just no escaping that in the world in which we live.
Yeah. But my real question / comment is about Mark Andreessen. I don't know if you watched the Mark Andreessen interview with Ross Douthat. It was on the New York Times podcast.
I haven't seen that one now.
There was a couple of interesting things in that. The first thing is he talks a fair amount about his conversion to be pro-Trump, which is sadly it's just one of these standard red pilling things where he talks about Russiagate and he talks about the Twitter files and all this other stuff that if you look at it and think about it is just nonsense. But to me, the biggest part of that whole interview and the most interesting part is the part where he insists that Trump wasn't in charge during his first administration. He even uses the term Hillary being in charge, but I think that was just a misstatement.
Yeah.
And to me, the interesting thing about that is that you hear this kind of thing from people like him and Curtis Yarvin, as much as an outsider Yarvin is, Andreessen will admit Yarvin is a good friend of Curtis Yarvin's. Like he respects him, obviously. And this led me to think about the deep state. And I think the deep state is kind of it's not an anti-concept, but it's a package deal. Because it gets used two ways. It gets used the first way is, the yes minister way, where you've got the people who work for the minister who have their own agenda and they'll do their own thing and they'll figure out ways to work around him to get what they want rather than what he wants. Okay, that's a real valid thing that happens and is part of the deep state. But when Andreessen and Yarvin are talking about it, and Yarvin is explicit, the other meaning of deep state is just the law. The underlying of the state is the law. And people like Andreessen and Yarvin want the president to do whatever he wants. That's if the law stops him from doing something, they say he wasn't in charge. And it's a huge problem. And it's just a way that this stuff gets packaged together. And you even see it, in objectivists. I think Brad Thompson uses deep state this way, and it's really sometimes not clear what he's talking about.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the law is really important. And, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that or comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's a package deal. I mean, I think the law, so two things. One is, I don't think it's just the way it's portrayed in Yes Minister, in the sense that in Yes Minister, the bureaucrats are motivated by laziness. They have a certain philosophical agenda, but it's not consistent. And look, 90-something% of government employees are Democrats. Now, it's not surprising because that's true of college graduates. It's why Twitter employees are Democrats and Facebook employees are Democrats. It's because educated people come out of the universities and they're all leftists. So I think there's more of and there's no question in my mind, there's more of a philosophical agenda. So you come into the EPA, and everybody in the EPA is an environmentalist. Why would you go to work for the EPA if you're not an environmentalist, committed environmentalist? And then you're coming in and you're not an environmentalist, try to change anything. And they're going to bamboozle you, and they're going to do all these things in order to get you not to change, just like they do in Yes Minister, but much more, ideologically motivated than Yes Minister. And of course, Yes Minister is a comedy, so half of it's kind of funny. It's done to be funny. Here, it's not funny. It's scary. So I definitely think that's the case. And then I also agree with you. Some of it is that the law is restraining. And here it's complicated because, so I mean, you can divide this up a number of different ways. I talked about this yesterday, I think. So one is these agencies, right? The SEC, all these things, which I think are completely unconstitutional. I think the Supreme Court should have thrown it out in the 1930s and didn't. And since it really goes back, I think, even to, I think it goes down to Wilson. I think the first of these, like the FDA, I think goes back to the teens or the 20s or something. And the Supreme Court let it happen. And so that's the law. These are independent agencies. And they will, you can appoint the head of them, but staff is all, and the legal structures within and the legal advice that they get is all motivated by a particular agenda that you might not support as president, and indeed Congress might not support, because Congress has let these things off and gone away. I mean, the real villain in this, put aside Trump, who's a villain, but the real villain in this is Congress, right? Because Congress has defaulted its responsibility. I mean, Dodd-Frank, which is a bill I know a little bit about. I'm not an expert on Dodd-Frank, but Dodd-Frank was a bill where basically Congress said, we don't know how to write this bill. It's too complicated. There's a lot of moving pieces in here. We're going to give you a shell, and you, the Fed, the FDIC, the banking regulators, you figure it out. And it's completely written by them with input from the industry. And this is where you get the cronyism and the accusation of cronyism. So some of these laws are just wrong and bad, and they do give way too much power to the bureaucracy over the president, and that is Congress's fault. I mean, it's all Congress's fault. Think about everything Trump is doing right now, with the exception of foreign policy. It's all Congress's fault. How come he can do what he's doing with tariffs? That's because Congress has defaulted in its responsibility constitutionally to be responsible for tariffs. How can he be doing what he's doing with immigration? It can't be. The only reason is Congress has defaulted in its responsibility vis-a-vis immigration. And there are a number of these issues where Congress won't take a stand. Even wars, Congress doesn't declare anymore. Just do what you want. Like they're gonna stop bombing. I wouldn't be surprised if they start bombing cartels in Mexico, right? You'd think Congress would have been involved in that? No, Congress doesn't want to be involved in it. So a lot of laws are passed and a lot of stuff happened that does distort the way the presidency works and how we can do. And I think, Curtis Yarvin wants an imperial president. He's not embarrassed about saying it. He wants a king. He wants a monarchy, not hereditary monarchy, a monarchy based on talent. I don't know how you do that, but he wants something like that. Fine. I don't think that's what Andreessen wants, although I don't know what he wants. That is, I'm not sure he knows what he wants. He's not super philosophical. He's not particularly intellectual. He's very easily influenced by somebody like Curtis Yarvin, who's, from what I can take, I don't know, is super charismatic and interesting and fun to talk to and whatever. Because they're all enamored with him. The Claremont Institute, which used to be constitutional conservatives, enamored with Curtis Yarvin. They're not anymore constitutional conservatives. There's a number of people in Silicon Valley who he's had influence. He's had influence on Elon. He's had influence on Peter Thiel. He's had influence on all these guys. And they're smart guys. So he must be smart and he must be interesting. But they're not very philosophical, so they don't have anything to come back to him with. And Andreessen strikes me as a kind of a pragmatist who's bounced around and who's come face to face with how bad the left can be. And, views the world in dualities, as so many people do. And if you're not going to be on the left, then you have to be on the right. And the only person yelling about the left is Trump, and maybe that's okay. And hey, the first 4 years of Trump weren't that bad. We'll ignore some of the really bad stuff, but it wasn't that bad. And yes, he was hampered by the state. I think it was just hampered by his own incompetence and his own kind of surprise that he won. Yeah, I mean, it's sad to see because I think Andreessen is a super smart guy who's been incredibly successful, incredibly productive in his career, and who read Ayn Rand, what did he say, 3-4 years ago, something like that. He read Atlas Shrugged, and therefore has been exposed to the good ideas and could have. But instead, Ayn Rand nudged him, he would say, probably nudged him to the right. But then it's a package deal, the right? So he takes Ayn Rand and he says, I'm for that. Oh, and these people also say they're for that. Peter Thiel mentions Ayn Rand and, these other people. So, they're the right as well. Maybe that's the same thing. Or this is a more realistic right. She's a more idealistic right. Who knows what happens inside his head. But yeah, it definitely is scary. And I think what we're experiencing now is a consequence. So Trump will do some good things, but the good things ultimately serve an evil purpose. And so those good things are kind of mitigated by the fact that they will serve a grander evil purpose, which is either him or J.D. Vance or whoever replaces him in the future. And Congress will stay weak, right? So it's not like he does this. It's not like he does this and then Congress reasserts its influence. Congress will stay weak. The president will become stronger, but it will become stronger even more because of the weakness of Congress. And you'll move more and more towards some form of weak authoritarianism and then ultimately strong authoritarianism. But that's the projection over the next 10, 20 years. And I don't see who is going to stop it. There's just nobody to slow this down because the left will embrace this. As soon as they get into power, if they do, they'll just embrace the extra power and they'll run with it. They'll just implement it in different ways. Anyway.
Yeah, 100% agree.
It goes back to Adam's point about, is there hope for America? On weeks like this, I certainly don't see the hope.
Yeah, thanks. I'll come back to the president part in my second question because I've got some thoughts on that too.
Sounds good. All right, Steve. Maybe Steve will be optimistic.
Second question will be optimistic. We'll talk about art. So let's get the
Okay.
pessimistic one out of the way first. So the surprising thing to me this week with what's been going on with Ukraine about to be carved up is that anyone is surprised by this. You know, the Biden administration had clearly had no plan in order to win. I don't think that a Harris administration also would have had any plan for Ukraine to win. And so it's whether it was happening now or 3 years from now, maybe with some fancier diplomatic language and people shuttling around between capitals in Europe and doing all sorts of things. I think the end result was going to be roughly something like this. And if you think about the last century, this is maybe the least surprising outcome. Because America has a long and storied tradition of abandoning all of its friends. There's a bunch of people in Afghanistan who learned this, the Kurds after the first Gulf War, Israel repeatedly, South Vietnam, all of Eastern Europe after World War II. And so I think Trump deserves the blame, but I think part of me is like, this really just shows how conventional he really is. Because the conventional, like kind of like US foreign policy position has been kind of to like get into a conflict without any real plan and like try and weasel your way out of it at the end.
I mean, it's a great point. I agree completely, and it's a great point. However, and I'll be accused of TDS. This is particularly bad. Even when Kissinger negotiated peace between South and North Vietnam, he didn't kind of embrace North Vietnam. He didn't say, well, they're really the good guys, or they didn't start it, or anything like that. It kind of, we don't have any choice. This is where it's led to. And Trump could have done that, right? He could have sat down and said, okay, yeah, Russia started it, but we're going to sit down and we're going to kind of deal because we can't let, it's wrong to let this keep going. He could have done that. He could have done a Kissinger. When we left Afghanistan, nobody pretended the Taliban were the good guys. Yeah, it was a failure, an American failure. Everybody acknowledged it. Yeah, we screwed up. In every case, again, the only other similarity is when we abandoned the Kurds, it was after Erdogan kind of asked Trump to abandon the Kurds. This is in 2018 or 19, whenever that was. And the second time we abandoned the Kurds more than once. And that was like, yeah, Erdogan's the good guy, but that's a Trumpish thing. I mean, any strong man is the good guy. So this was worse because of the massive explicit, usually it's implicit. This time, and this is the thing Trump does, right? All these politicians are awful and bad. Trump takes their bad things, but they hide it, right? They pretend that they're not. They all lie, but they pretend that they're not lying. Trump doesn't care. Trump, it just says everything, and everything's out there. So Trump goes out and says, Ukraine started the war. Completely bogus. He goes out and praises Putin. He goes out and says Zelensky is a dictator. Never. These are things that nobody else would do. So that, I think people, I mean, I'm not surprised. This is Trump. I predicted this, before the election. But people are surprised by it because they always think Trump isn't what he really is. They always think, no, he says this stuff, but then he doesn't really act on it. And to some extent that happened the first term because he wasn't organized enough to act on the things that he believed in. This time he's organized. This time he has a crew, he has a staff, he's put into place, these nutcases whose only qualification to be in the role that they're in, from the defense secretary to the HHS to any of these things, is that they're Trump acolytes. That is the only, that's the only qualification they have. So I think people are surprised by, oh, he really is as bad as he seemed to be, right? And people are still surprised by his emotional outbursts. like, which is shocking because they should have learned the first time. He'll go on Twitter at 1 a.m. and attack Zelensky or whatever, and they're surprised by it. So I think it's not the action itself, the negotiating the peace. It's all of Trump's stuff around it, where he is making explicit what was always implicit in American foreign policy.
Maybe I focus too much on like the bigger picture of these things, but what do you like? What's going to be the actual or what are the possible ramifications of all these implicit things being made explicit now?
Well, I think they're huge. I think that that I think there's now a clear path for Putin that I don't think he quite he I don't think he was confident in before to basically work on carving up Europe and go beyond Ukraine to what is next and to carve it up maybe even with full explicit American support. I think making it explicit has made the Europeans on the positive side. Maybe this is a positive. The fact that it's explicit is forcing the Europeans to now rethink who they are and what they're going to do and how they're going to act. It could bring Europe together, could, unlikely, but it could. It could make them spend more on defense. It could, as long as it's implicit, everybody's like sleeping on it. They're not really acting. But once you make it explicit, I think that people they have to face the consequences. They can't hide from the consequences. So I think it emboldens Putin in a way that wouldn't have emboldened him if it was implicit. And it puts more urgency behind Europe and what Europe needs to do. And it'd be interesting to see if Europe can live up to that. It's very much, it's somewhat going to depend on the election in Germany tomorrow, but because Germany is the ones that's been resistant to doing this. Macron in France has wanted this. And then it's going to depend on how much influence they give people like Orban in Hungary. Because if they have to do it unanimously, then nothing will happen. Because Orban and Fick in Slovakia, pro-Putin, won't let it happen. And I'm not sure what the Spanish and the Portuguese, they're kind of far away. They don't seem to really care. But the Scandinavians on board. Scandinavians want action. I actually think that the Dutch want action. I think Meloni is very anti-Putin. Surprisingly, she's quite good. I think this could be a real wake-up call for Europe, at least in the security dimension. So that's what I think, making it explicit. Oh, and the other thing is, it demoralizes our allies in ways that I don't think they would have been quite as demoralized, and it emboldens our enemies. So I do think Xi is really paying attention, right? This is really big deal for China. Exactly how this plays out, what exactly happens, how much does Trump cave, what is there's this mineral deal that's supposedly Zelensky again today refused to sign it. They were saying he would sign it, and they said they wouldn't sign it. We'll see. But let's say he signs it, and he's assigned a bunch of these minerals to the U.S., whatever the U.S. means, right? Because why is the U.S. government getting this? I mean, it's all corrupt. But imagine, I've proposed this before. Imagine if Xi now says, "Okay, I wonder if I give TSMC to Trump, right? Just pick up the plant and move it to Texas or something. If he'll give me Taiwan." I mean, I think Trump would go for it. I think Trump would say yes. I hate to give Xi advice, but I think Trump would say yes. So, Japan has to be wondering what the hell is going on. South Korea, this is why I think these countries need nukes as soon as possible. Because I think they have to come to the conclusion, which they should have already had, but now it's explicit. So they can't hide from it, that they can't trust the United States. All right. And I'm not sure if Israel's learning anything. Israel's got its head so buried deep into sand that I don't think it even is noticing what's going on around it. So
That's maybe the saddest thing that I have watched happen. Like the it's almost like an abused spouse there. You just cannot get your arms around, given the threat that they face,
Yeah.
why anyone would depend upon us.
Well, partially is because they don't have the will internally, right? There's a strong anti-war contingent within Israel. But also you see Trump's kind of just craziness and inconsistencies there. So he says stuff like wipe Hamas out, and we're going to rebuild Hamas is going to be American. We're going to plant an American flag there. It's going to be ours. Again, what the hell does that mean? America's building real estate now in Gaza. So, but this is the kind of stuff he says. But then his envoy in the Middle East goes to Netanyahu and says, you better cut a deal with Hamas over the second stage of the ceasefire. We want you to cut a deal. So you better compromise. You better sell out. So, complete inconsistency. It would be really interesting to find out what Netanyahu really thinks, not what he says, but what he really thinks about Trump. Because he's getting these completely upside down messages, completely mixed messages. I have no idea. All right. Thanks, Steve. Alejandro.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. So you going to Austin?
I am going to Austin. I guess
Okay.
you're not gonna be there.
No, I'm not going to be there, but there'll be plenty of people to ask questions to.
Sounds fun. Yeah, I don't know if you got my email about the talk and at the university. It's unfortunate, but I guess you cannot be coming.
At the university where? In
At Michigan, I had said that
yeah, I
it
did.
had been booked up. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That would be an interesting place to do a talk on Israel, given how many anti-Israel, how much of the anti-Israeli community is up there.
Yeah. But I guess my question was a little different.
Yep.
So you had talked, I'm trying to understand the causes of why someone goes to war in certain situations. And the example I think I've been given was the Civil War and Abraham Lincoln. And of course, no one endorses the slavery and all. Obviously, the South was wrong and everything like that. But I'm struggling to understand why someone in Vermont or someone in Maine should care so much that they're willing to march all the way to like Alabama to free the slaves. I mean, after all, there's horrific things happening all over the world. And then part of that was that I think the reason there was a draft law in the US during that time was because people were unwilling to do that. And what are your thoughts on that?
So this is the thing. It's your country. It's your constitution. It's your government. It's your country. Yes, there's no reason to march to, Africa to free whatever. But there is a meaning to a country, or there's not. There is a meaning to living in a particular country. And the question is, do you want to live in a country where you know that fellow residents in this country are treated the way they are treated? And I think it's beholden on the political leadership to rally people towards the idea and towards a cause that says, no, it's this is wrong. It's not a foreign place. It's not someplace somewhere else. This is right here. It's in your country, and it needs to stop. It's a massive violation of rights. I mean, what is it? I mean, imagine you live in Vermont, and a gang takes over one of the towns, and they run the town. They rape the women, they murder whoever they want. They're running around. They're doing whatever the hell they want in this town. And the governor of Vermont is like, we'll just stay out of that town. We're just, we don't live there. I don't live there. The police outside of that town would say, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go to that town. We'll just rope it off and not interact with them, and we'll leave them alone. Let them do what they will. Well, either being a citizen means something or it doesn't mean something. Being a resident of a place means something or it doesn't mean something. And I think we have to fight against anarchy. We have to reject anarchy and fight against it. And when there are massive violations of individual rights against fellow citizens, I mean, imagine if the state of, I don't know, I'll pick Texas, the state of Texas tomorrow starts rounding up Jews and setting up concentration camps. And we all say, well, we don't live in Texas. So, let Texans do what Texans do. Well, I'm not going to fight for Texas. I live in Puerto Rico, never mind, Vermont. So why would I go to Texas to fight? Well, either you accept the responsibility of protecting individual rights within the state, or you accept anarchy. You accept the negation of the state. The state is meaningless. Anybody can do whatever they want. I can imagine police not going into certain neighborhoods because they say, it's risky to go into those neighborhoods. Why should I go into those neighborhoods? The gangs might shoot up my police car. So I'm not going to go there. Why would I risk my life? So I think if creating a state and having a citizen and having a constitution that protects individual rights, that I think requires one to dedicate oneself to that protection. Now, it's true, some people might not want to do it. And if there are enough people who don't want to do it, then the state will fall apart and break into anarchy. And I don't know enough about the Civil War, so I'm not a Civil War historian, so I don't know enough about how many people volunteered, whether draft conscription was really necessary in a sense of raising an army, whether the North could have won with an all-volunteer army or not. I don't know. That's a good question to ask a Civil War historian. Actually, it's probably worth reading about. Maybe I'll do a little bit of reading about it. But it is interesting. So conscription is always wrong. And my view has always been, okay, no conscription, fine. But then if you can't raise an army to win, then you've accepted defeat and you've accepted the fact that you accept either anarchy or you accept the authoritarianism of whoever's invading you. In this case, I think you would have had the United States completely breaking up, completely dissolved. You would have had slavery expanded. Let's assume the South wins, right? And ultimately, you would have had kind of anarchy because every state would have said, we can do whatever we want. The federal government's not going to do anything about it. And our fellow citizens will not fight to preserve individual rights. So, hey, come World War II, maybe we'll side with the Nazis. Some states will side with England. And, it's just a complete breakup of civilization. So either you protect individual rights and you as a citizen are committed to that and are willing to fight for that, or you accept the opposite, which is either authoritarianism or anarchy.
I think that's a good answer. So to bring it back to, I guess, the current, I know, for example, a lot of the Ukrainian citizens who, once the war started, they got on a plane and went to New York, got an apartment, and lived their life perfectly in New York. And I'm just, I don't, what is the, I guess, moral characterization of that?
So I don't necessarily blame them. Certainly at the beginning of the war, it looked like Russia was going to win. As it turns out, not many Ukrainians did that. Most Ukrainians went to Poland, into Germany, and went into Europe. And about, I think, 4 million refugees, Ukrainian refugees in Europe right now. Most of them women and children, but some, I'm sure some men. Again, if Ukraine empties out of men and nobody's willing to fight in the front, then they deserve to lose. I have no problem with that. Then Putin doesn't deserve to win, but Ukraine, the Ukrainians deserve to lose. If they can't muster an army of volunteers to go and defend themselves, and I have to say that the one thing about Ukraine that disappoints me, the one thing about Ukraine that I'm not happy about, is the fact that young Ukrainians are not many young Ukrainians are volunteering to serve in the army. And, that's part of the problem they have. They have a real manpower problem. It's part of why they haven't been more successful on the battlefield. They don't have enough troops. It's pretty it's pretty pathetic. It's pretty pathetic for that country. Israel, on the other hand, I think if you turned Israel into a complete volunteer army, I think you would field pretty much everybody you needed. Israelis will volunteer, certainly after October 7th, but even before, enough Israelis would volunteer to defend the country. It's sad that you're not seeing the same in Ukraine, and maybe in that sense they deserve to lose. But again, what I hate is that Putin wins to some extent, even more than I hate that Ukraine loses. But I saw a post today. Here's a good example of this, Alejandro. Somebody posted something like, people have been saying, a lot of people are dying in Ukraine. We need peace. We need to get it over with. We need to negotiate with Putin. So somebody, and then there was a news item that over the last few days, Russia has been flying a lot of combat airplanes very, very, very close to Alaska. So somebody posted, kind of in jest, well, we don't want to have to lose a lot of people. We don't want to have millions die in Alaska. Let's just negotiate now to give it to Putin so we don't have to fight a war over Alaska. And I said, and I commented about how ridiculous that how that's a joke, but it reflects, I think, the reality out there. And somebody wrote to me, probably a libertarian, he said, yeah, I wouldn't want to go and fight in Alaska to save Alaska. If Putin wants Alaska, let him have it. Well, okay, but Washington State and Oregon and Mexico wants Canada, and Mexico wants Canada. No, Trump wants Canada. Mexico wants California. I mean, where does that end? Let's just go home and give up. That's it. So at some point you have to draw a line, and I certainly would draw a line on what is America's. I certainly would fight a war to defend Hawaii and defend Alaska. And we can have a discussion about whether we should fight a war in South Korea, we should fight a war in Taiwan, we should fight a war in Japan, whether we should fight a war in Ukraine. But, the attitude of a lot of people are dying, therefore we must surrender, that is a horrific attitude. And again, if you're not willing to fight, you die. That's okay. Some people, civilizations, cultures, countries disappear. And countries that are not willing to fight for their own independence, for their own freedom, disappear. And I guess they deserve to disappear. Thanks, Alejandro. All right, Bruce.
Hi, Yaron. You covered part of a question that I have. It seems like we're missing a great opportunity to see the ultimate collapse of the Russian Federation, which I think would be a major benefit to the entire world going forward. Could be on par with the negative effect of the Peloponnesian Wars. The collapse of Russia is just would be huge, or the Federation anyway. That said, so I had a notion last week that, and this is not, I think the lies that Trump told are reprehensible. But I had a notion last week that I wonder if the actual target of his words, and you covered a little bit of this, is more on the implicit side that Europe, you better get your shit together. This is this is predominantly your war. We're pulling out of protecting Europe. You guys have not been keeping up your end of the deal, and we're ultimately going to pull out of NATO. So you guys need to step up and make this happen. Russia's effectively got the economy. They can't outproduce Italy. So Europe should be able to easily handle all this.
Look, I think if that's what he wanted, he could have said that, right? He didn't
True.
have to basically be pro-Putin, right? So you can do that. And I think it would be good to do that. I've spoken for years and years and years about the U.S. leaving NATO, and the need ultimately for the U.S. to leave NATO and create a path for the U.S. to leave NATO. But that doesn't require you to embolden and to strengthen and to give moral legitimacy to Putin. So,
Agreed.
there are two resolutions right now at the UN. One that blames Russia for starting the war and then calls for peace and negotiations, and the other one that doesn't blame Russia but just calls for peace and negotiation. And Trump is refusing to have the United States sign off on the one that blames Russia. You don't need that in order to get to wake up the Europeans. All you have to say to Europeans is, by the time I leave office, we will reduce our troops in Europe by 80%. We will start withdrawing our nuclear weapons off of. We'll take them out of Poland. We'll take them out of Germany. Right? They just put them in Poland, I think, or they're just about to put them in Poland. We'll take them out of there. We'll send them back home. And Europe, you're on your own, and you've got 4 years to adjust, because that's easy. That would be rational, and that would be okay. But that's not what he's doing, right? And he's not even saying I'm withdrawing. You guys are bad guys. You guys are horrible. You guys, and Putin's okay. Putin's good. Putin's nice. I like Putin.
Yeah, that's the part that
the guy's insane. The guy, I mean, it drives me nuts. The guy is clearly, corrupt morally and maybe financially as well, but certainly morally. He's clearly 100% corrupt. He's clearly a moron in important, significant areas of life. He has no clue what he's talking about. And yet people rationalize him and justify him all the time. It just drives me nuts. And people know this, right? If you take Neil Ferguson aside and talk to him on the side, does he know Trump's a moron? Absolutely. But he won't say anything. He'll always say, yes, Trump's really good, but I disagree with him on this. And the same with, what's his name, who wrote that good piece in the New York Post. And yet nobody will they'll criticize him and then compliment him, because they know that if they don't compliment him, if they don't have the Douglas Murray, if they don't have the positive 1-2 sentences positive stuff in their article after they've criticized Trump a little bit, then they won't be invited to the parties, and they'll be out, and it's very, very important for them to be in. And it drives me nuts. And then there are the people who have Trump mindlessness syndrome, or somebody's proposing something else, Trump something else. I like mindlessness. I know it's a mouthful. It's not a great word, but what I want to portray is that Trump causes people not to be able to think anymore. That is, they don't think for themselves. Trump dependence syndrome, maybe, but something that relates to incapacitating the mind in favor of the tribe. And that's what Trump does to people. All right, let's take a couple of super chats, and then we'll come back to our panel. Q2 Santos. Trump seems to believe that countries only have legitimacy to be sovereign if they are able to maintain their own sovereignty by force or deterrence. Is he correct? Is every country on its own? No, I certainly do not think so. There's absolutely no reason for that. Now, I think in the real world, there's some truth there. When you have large aggressive players, and when, let's say, a country like the United States decide that it's not going to intervene anymore, it's going to step aside, then maybe Europe needs to become a country. I've always said there are too many countries in the world. There are too many small countries in the world. And what happens when you have a lot of small countries is they become prey to very large, successful, very large, let's say, rich countries, for rich militarily, at least. And maybe it's better if Europe just becomes a federation, which I know people think I'm crazy, but I am all for. I think Europe should be a federation of states and have its own army and protect its own borders. And if Ukraine was part of that federation, then Russia would have never invaded, because Russia would last exactly a week fighting a real European military force, a coordinated, integrated European military force. I mean, Europe is so much richer than Russia. It's got a much larger population than Russia. It has much better weapons than Russia, much more advanced weapons than Russia, and it has and could have a lot more nuclear weapons as well. So it could have a nuclear umbrella. Maybe what you need is a few big countries rather than maybe you need like I've always said you need like 50 countries in the world max, maybe fewer, maybe 20, and have them all have nukes, and it's mutually assured destruction all the way around, and then you have peace. You have peace in the world. It is true that if you're a small country and you live next to a large militarily powerful authoritarian state that is intent on conquest, and you could be eaten up. Now, one way around that, one way to prevent that, is through alliances. It's exactly what NATO is supposed to deal with, right? The whole point of NATO is, yes, Europe after World War II, you're too weak to defend yourselves against the Soviet Union. So we, the United States, will help you out so that the Soviet Union won't invade you. You can imagine a Pacific alliance where the United States and Japan and South Korea and Taiwan have a military alliance saying, yes, none of you could protect yourselves independently from China. We're forming an alliance to protect you. So alliances like that, when they serve a real national interest and when they're targeted against a real enemy, make sense. Britain couldn't have won the World War II by itself. It needed, at the end of the day, it needed the United States to form an alliance with it in order to win it. So you need such alliances. And and there's nothing wrong with such alliances when they serve a real national interest, and I think they can, and they do. So, if you're a small country in the world as it's developing right now, you should be scared. I mean, I think the people right now who should be most scared are South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. Taiwan more than anybody, because America's not going to be there for you. You're going to have to fight this on your own. You don't have nukes; your enemies do. And Japan, by constitution, is not allowed to invest in a significant military. So if I were Japan, I would change my constitution tomorrow. I would start investing heavily in the military, and I would get myself some nukes as quickly as possible. And the same, and South Korea, which already has, I think, a pretty formidable military, needs to assume it will get no protection from the United States and needs to develop its military in order to take out the North Koreans without it. And that, I think, ultimately is going to require them to also buy some nukes or build some nukes themselves. They're all advanced economies. They could build themselves nukes. They don't even need to buy them. But military alliances saves a lot of effort and time and money. But when one side reneges on them, they're a problem. James, is there a concerted effort to use new mathematical or scientific products to nihilistic ends, like Gödel's incompleteness theorem and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle? I mean, it's a chicken and egg question, right? You could argue that it's because of the Kantian almost nihilistic philosophy that existed at the time that you even got a Heisenberg uncertainty principle and so on, or the particular interpretation of it, which is interpreted in a way that claims to be all destructive of objective reality. I don't think quantum mechanics is that. I don't think even the Heisenberg's uncertainty principle is that, but it's interpreted that way. That interpretation at the origin was not motivated by nihilism, but was motivated by modern philosophy that just believes that reality is unintelligible. And I think in more modern times, it is used by lazy people who don't even know what Gödel's theory is or what Heisenberg's uncertainty principle actually says. It's used by lazy people to justify their subjectivism and to justify their evasion of reality and their willingness and their desire to put the emotion before facts, their consciousness before existence. So maybe there's some serious intellectuals who actually think this, and then they're just playing out Kant. They're just playing out their philosophy. But again, that's the same philosophy that made these hypotheses to begin with, and they've been interpreted in that way forever since they were introduced. Andrew says, my vote is for Trump zombie syndrome. That's not bad. I think it captures the mindlessness. Wish I could have made the show today, still showing support. Thank you, Andrew. Really, really appreciate that. Trump zombie syndrome. Trump zombie. I like that. I like that. Maybe we'll switch. It's certainly better than mindlessness, which is a mouthful. Zombie is like Trump zombie syndrome. Yes. All right. I think I'm now. I think, and they do come in big packs. Steve says that's true. So it does capture the tribalism as well, because zombies kind of all hang out as a tribe. So yeah. All right. TZS. TZS. I like that. Thank you, Andrew. All right, let's go back to our panel. Adam.
Something entirely different.
Good.
But recently, some of us received an email from a well-known objectivist that is 180 degrees away from what I'm going to say now, which is that there can be no such thing as a right to infect another person with a serious communicable disease. Infecting somebody with a potentially deadly disease is clearly an initiation of force. And I think that it is reasonable, just as is the custom in East Asia, and maybe it ought to be a part of our laws, that if you have the symptoms of a potentially communicable disease, wear a mask and don't infect other people. Do you think this is reasonable?
So I don't know anything about this email. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay. Then
who wrote it? I don't know what it said.
Okay, essentially there was a claim that imposing a mask requirement, even in private, even if I have a store and I say nobody can come in unless they're wearing a mask because there's a pandemic going around, that it's a violation of individual rights, it's an imposition, and so on.
An objectivist said this?
Well, that's the way I read it. Maybe I misread the letter, but certainly we have...
That's pretty weird.
A significant part of Trump zombies, now that we know what to call them, who are behind RFK, who just announced that essentially no institution that is, quote, receiving federal funds, unquote, which means, for example, a manufacturer of weapons who has a contract with the US government to run a factory making essential armaments for the US government, they're not permitted to require their employees to wear masks.
Yeah. So I haven't heard that from RFK, but it doesn't surprise me. So certainly, unequivocally, a private business can tell you you have to wear a mask all the time if they want to. They can decide you can't. You have to wear a shirt if you come into their store, or you have to wear closed shoes if you come to the store. It's their store. They get to decide the terms on which you interact with them. And if you don't like them, you don't have to go there. So I don't think that should be controversial at all. And if it is among objectivists, then they don't understand private property, and they don't understand what liberty actually means. In terms of should it be standard practice, I don't think I agree with you. Partially because one has to differentiate between contagious diseases. I don't think you can. I think you have to separate out contagious diseases that constitutes a real life threat, and contagious diseases that are just part of living in a society. Half the time we don't even know we're carrying contagious diseases. We're all carriers at some point of all kinds of viruses, whether we're sick or not. And it would be very hard to implement. It would be very hard to monitor. Not very hard. It would be impossible to monitor. It would be possible. But when there is a pandemic, when there is clearly a virus that is a risk, and there are people that are at risk, one can certainly demand isolation for and if the risk is grave, hospitalization and death, one can certainly isolate the people and prevent them from infecting other people. One can require people to not interact with other people socially. The reality is that masks are not particularly good at preventing people from getting the diseases, partially because some diseases are airborne and some diseases on surfaces, and some people wear masks properly and other people don't wear masks that properly. It is interesting that when I looked at the statistics in Asia about how many people get sick from like the flu and colds in East Asia, you'd think that you'd get fewer people getting sick because they wear masks. And I've seen no evidence to suggest that. I don't know what to make of that. But I just don't think you can pass laws about the cold, the common cold, which is the most communicable disease. Or I got the stomach flu, right? The stomach virus. Now the stomach virus doesn't come by air. It actually comes from surfaces. I don't know where I got it. Clemson. We should lock down Clemson. I mean, it's just, I think it has to be something that is associated with something very, very, harmful to a large percentage of the population. And then I think the appropriate response is isolation, not mask wearing. I think that's why I think Amish and myself advocated so strongly at the beginning of COVID, test and isolate. That's what Taiwan did. That's to some extent what South Korea did. And they had a lot less COVID than anybody else. You test, people who are positive, get isolated. And you don't lock people down. You lock people who have the virus down. And, you make testing ubiquitous. You make it super cheap and everywhere. And that is a solution to real communicable diseases, to pandemics. It's always been what the CDC proposed until COVID, when they completely backed off of their, what they've always recommended. Okay, yeah.
I do want to say that during the pandemic, because I was personally concerned for good reasons, I used to keep a graph of the incidence of deaths from COVID in different Southern California cities around me. I got the statistics for Los Angeles County, which counts the cases and deaths in every city. And I noticed almost immediately that cities with a high East Asian population, with many Japanese, Koreans, and Taiwanese immigrants, where wearing masks as part of the culture had much lower death rates than
It's
other
very,
cities.
it's very difficult to draw causality out of that. So for example, according to RFK, and we know that all the information he provides us is 100% accurate, the COVID virus was designed not to harm Asians, right? And Jews. So you were overly protective because as a Jew, it wasn't going to hurt you anyway. So, God, there is a problem, of course, of causation versus correlation. I don't know that this is the answer, but you would have to control for age. Asian population in Southern California is significantly younger, I think, than other populations around. And of course, young people were a lot less susceptible to die from COVID. It's also true that my guess is that Asians were much more conscious of the issue and therefore probably isolated themselves much more aggressively. They probably didn't leave their home as much as some other people. Generally in LA, my experience in LA is that people wore masks, even non-Asians. I saw a lot of mask wearing, particularly among young people, the least susceptible people. Young people wore a lot of masks. I mean, I was shocked. Well, what shocked me was going to universities well into COVID, where young people were wearing masks outdoors, where the possibility of them getting the virus is zero. In an outdoor environment, which is not everybody's close to each other, but people are spread out. Young people were very compliant, which is strange because it's usually the other way around. Young people are the rebellious and the older compliant. But here with COVID, it was the other way around. Young people are the most compliant. And because old people were not compliant, old people died much more than they needed to. But yeah, you have to, of course, you know this, you have to control for all kind of factors if you're going to do, find the actual cause. Thanks, Adam. Ian.
Yeah, so I liked your comments, I think it was yesterday, about the presidential executive order trying to take back some of the responsibility for some of the agencies. But I think it might take a little more digging into. And I think part of it goes, we were talking before about package deals. So I think the president has also become a package deal in a sense, because when we talk about the president, we actually mean two things. One is there's this constitutional role. He is the chief executive. His job is to execute the laws. There's also this implicit thing, though, that he is the head, the unofficial head of a political party. And those two things are very opposed. Because like the executive order said, that these agencies should stick to the president's policies and preferences. Well, as a constitutional role, his policies and preferences should only relate to how to execute the law, right? And what is happening here is that really those are being mixed together, and we're getting policies and preferences that are political policies and preferences. So, for example, Trump is anti-DEI. So he puts out a thing that says you can't do DEI even if that's already written into the law, and that is just wrong. And to me, I think there is an objective sense in which you could have and should have independent agencies. That's not how they are currently, but the objective sense is that they should be independent of the political role of the president. That they should be focused on executing the law, and the president should guide them how to do that. But he should not have policies or preferences outside that. And any area he does is in the same way that substantive due process says that any law that violates rights is not legally proper. Any policy or preference of the president that as a political actor is an invalid and an unconstitutional thing.
So I'm not sure I agree with you. And this would be interesting to bring one of our lawyers in, kind of somebody who knows the Constitution and constitutional law better. I think there are a few dimensions here. First of all, the president has to have politics, right? He has an opinion. He proposes a budget to Congress. He's involved in the development of laws always has been. He sponsors laws. His political party sponsors laws guided by him. So clearly a president has a
But that
political.
is not his constitutional role, though. He can do that, but that is suggesting things to Congress, they execute them, and then
Sure.
he executes the laws.
Sure, but yes, Congress ultimately is responsible for the law. But it's also true that laws have wide berths of interpretation. Even good laws are hard to interpret, and different political parties are going to interpret it differently. And you cannot have independent agencies that are not beholden to an executive. There has to be a chain of command. There has to be, and the president has to be at the end of the day. So I agree with you that that one provision where he says, based on the president's, I think he should have just said whims, not policies and politics, but just whims, is wrong. But here's the thing: I think that's where the courts need to step in. That is, if the president, through the agencies, is misinterpreting the law, then that is the basis of a lawsuit, and the Supreme Court needs to come in and say, "This is out. You're not interpreting the law right." Just like they do now, right? So you sue the whole Chevron thing was, we want the agencies to interpret, to just follow the law, not to go off and do all these other things. Well, yes, but that includes them doing things that the president tells them that are not in the law. This is what we have a court system for, and this is what the courts should be correcting for. And what Trump is forcing, which is going to be interesting and a little scary, is the Supreme Court is going to be, look, put it this way. We have had a government that for the last 110 years, since Wilson, certainly, maybe even before, but certainly since Wilson, has been unconstitutional through and through in every aspect. They passed unconstitutional laws. They've interpreted them wrong. They've implemented wrong. Everything they've done. And the Supreme Court has been guilty of this, particularly since FDR, guilty in allowing this to happen. There is an opportunity now for the Supreme Court, because all these cases are going to come to it, to recalibrate and to improve the situation, at least somewhat. But it also could, if it interprets these things wrong, it could lead us towards authoritarianism faster. So how the Supreme Court rules in many respects is going to be much more important than anything Donald Trump writes or does or any particular executive order. But to some extent, the fact that it's all going to go to the court is probably good. That's where it belongs in the end. Let's see. I think this court is not bad on some of these issues. I'm actually hopeful that at least they will rein in certain powers, both of the presidency and of the agencies. They are very constitutional minded. At least, I think there's 3 or 4 of them that are, where they can get a majority. We'll see.
Well, it depends if we get the court of the Loper-Bright decision or if we get the court of the immunity decision. Because the Loper-Bright was very constitutionally good. The immunity decision,
I think
they made stuff up.
I don't think the immunity decision wasn't that. I don't think it was that bad. And I think
it's terrible.
I don't think it was that bad. And I think when we had Adam, who did we have on, who didn't think it was that bad either? Maybe Steve Simpson. I don't think it was that bad, but it does depend. I mean, Thomas sadly has become a Trump zombie a little bit. So Thomas worries me. On some things he'll be good because he'll think he's supporting Trump. On other things, he might just support Trump for the sake of supporting Trump. Gorsuch, I think, is good. I think Barrett is surprisingly good. I'm shocked because I thought Barrett would be the worst. But she has turned out to be quite good. And she had a good concurring opinion on the immunity clause that actually brought in some interesting questions that I thought. She's an original thinker. She's outside the box a little bit. And then you've got the middle of the road nothings, Roberts and Kavanaugh. Who knows how they go? They could go in any direction, and depends on the political poll and how, Roberts is so obsessed with the image of the court and his own legacy as Chief Justice that he might not want to be too radical. But it is going to be an interesting opportunity It's going to be an interesting opportunity bringing this to the Supreme Court and seeing how it plays out. But we will see. And of course, the immunity decision was so vague, and that's the sense it was bad. In that sense, it was bad. That it's very much going to depend on how the courts interpret it. Because I think there's an interpretation of it which is not bad, but there are interpretations that are awful. So it's going to depend on, and we're never, we'll see how. There was an opportunity to test that with the cases against Trump, but all those cases are gone. So we'll never know about that. All right, thanks, Ian. Steve.
So let's turn our focus to something a bit lighter, which is art. So this summer, I spent a couple weeks in southern Italy, and maybe for you rubbing off on me, spent quite a bit of time, going to art museums, and I guess I have like a different appreciation for it now, but also now that I have gone from Catholicism as something that's kind of like benign and out there, to something that I detest. It's like hard to like reconcile the art, right? So if you take someone like, and some of it's like bizarre to me, like if you look at someone like Caravaggio and people like love this guy, or like some of the paintings are like interesting, but a lot of them involve like people dying, or you'll see like I forget the saint's name. He's constantly beating his chest with a rock. I went to a thing and they had like 10 different ones of this. Like I find myself drawn more to like when you go to what's the big museum in Rome at that guy's house?
Oh yeah, the Bernini's there.
Yeah, that one. Like the things that involve like
Villa Borghese.
Yeah. Like I find myself much more drawn to like the kind of like the classic.
Yep.
When they're like the first sculpture in there is like the Rape of Persephone or something like that. I love that much more. But like the saints dying, like I can't like get my arms around being like, what we would do is we're going to commission this. So when I come down to breakfast at my big house,
yeah, you would never
I
put
can
it in
see
your house.
someone being shot full of arrows. But someone did. Like at one point, someone was like, what we're going to do? We're going to like get this painting. I'm going to put it in my house. So I guess my question is like, how do you reconcile like something which is like technically good? Like the Sistine Chapel is like technically good, but like I'm not as much interested in the subject matter that it portrays.
Well, so first, that's great. I mean, at the end of the day, what matters is what you like and what you don't like, right? And what subject matters you find interesting and what you don't. And I agree. I mean, I would never put a saint with arrows or beating himself in the chest on a painting in my home. I mean, that would be nuts. I mean, that because the theme is I know what the theme is ultimately, even though I can enjoy the painting in a moment, and I can. If I go to a museum, I can enjoy the painting. Why? Because the painting is not just a theme. I mean, Leonard talks about this in the survival value of great but evil art, right? Great art, but that is as an evil theme. So first of all, they're just done so beautifully. Like Caravaggio, I love Caravaggio. I'm one of those people who love Caravaggio. So now he does have some secular themed paintings, but he also has these religious themes. But I just love the drama. God, can he portray drama with the lights, and he portrays these characters and their expressions and what are they thinking? Why are they doing this? Put aside the religious stuff. Who cares if it's Jesus they're looking at? What's going on here in this picture? This is really interesting. And the way he draws my eye to different faces. Now, again, I don't have any Caravaggio paintings on my walls because it's not something I want to live with. But I love going to museums and looking at them because of what I gain from just seeing the artistry and the drama and everything else. So, but the themes, at the end of the day, I can't relate to them and I drop them. Although there's some secular Caravaggios in the Villa Borghese, at least one that are really pretty. And I could see maybe having that on a wall. It's like Michelangelo's Pietà. You probably saw that at the Vatican, right? Now, unfortunately, you're seeing it from far away and behind glass. So you can't really appreciate the sculpture. But to me, that is this, a hero has died. It could be his wife because she's about his age. It's not even his mother, Mary. And she is, you could say she's resigned, she's accepted, she's got this sense of resignation, but there's a grandeur to the whole thing, right? Now, I don't like the fact that she's resigned to it. I would prefer she was a little angry about it, but she's resigned to God, so that's the theme of it. But it's just so well made. It's so beautiful. The emotion is. Leonard Peikoff's favorite sculpture is the Dying Slave in at the Louvre, and philosophically, this is not a positive theme, but it's so well done. It's so heart wrenching in terms of the emotion. It's so conveying that emotion directly, and that's what you can get out of it. And it's a struggle, and we can all appreciate a struggle, even though the struggle might be not turning out the way you would want it to be in this moment. So it is an issue. I mean, the reality is when you see the Bernini and the rape of whatever her name is, it's not the theme that you're really enjoying because the theme is rape, right? Or at least a big part of the theme is rape, the story. That's not what you're enjoying. But there is a certain more secular notion to it. There is, again, there's drama in it, and it's so beautifully sculpted. It's such a magnificent composition. And by the way, that I have on my wall. I have a photo of that on the wall in my living room. So that one and the other, and all three of the big Berninis in that museum, I have posters of them on the wall. The David and the rape, and then there's one other one where she's turning into a tree, or is that the rape one?
Yeah. That one might be my favorite sculpture in that entire museum.
So, it's not about the story there. It's about the drama, the execution, the movement, the motion, the conflict of values. It's in that sense, it's conveying all of that. So I think there's certain subjects that are never going to appeal to you, and that's fine. And then the question is, can you find any value in the painting or the sculpture? Not to put in your living room, but when you go to a museum. And maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no. And if it's no, and you don't want to put the effort into discovering a value, that's fine, because there are too many good paintings and sculptures out there to worry about. I don't like Caravaggio, and I don't want to see Caravaggio. I'll just go to the stuff, and life's too short to spend too much time on the stuff you don't really like. But often you will discover that after seeing a particular painter, a particular genre a few times, you start gaining an appreciation for it. Again, not fully. It's not Michelangelo's David, but okay, I get something out of it. I can walk into a room in a museum and spot a Caravaggio, and I'm there, right? Because it has a certain appeal to me, that I think the drama in particular. But I get it that somebody wouldn't like it. And then there's a question of aesthetic evaluation, and that's a whole other. It's what you like, and then there's what is good, which are not always the same thing. So
I decided to ask you this when I was I was in the Sistine Chapel, and we're looking up, and I'm like, yes, it's good, but do I really want to be here for an hour? Probably not, but I feel like I should. And then I started thinking, most other people in here are just in here because they think they should.
Yeah, they think they should, absolutely. So yeah, the Sistine Chapel is a good example, and even more so. Well, not the ceiling, but what is it? The Judgment Day, right? There's one wall that is Judgment Day. So on the Sistine Chapel, the section that has God and Adam, to me, is spectacular. It's just, and the fingers almost touching, and the spark of life, and this idea of life and consciousness, and that to me is drama, and it's clever. It's very well executed, and there's something interesting there. I don't believe in the story, but it's okay. But it's mythology. It's a presentation of particular mythology. I like the other figures because I like the fact that they're so muscular and strong, and they're anti-Christian. What I like about the Sistine Chapel, particularly the roof, is that it's anti-Christian, right? This isn't, Christians don't do this. These are powerful people. These are strong human beings. This is not how the New Testament would portray them. And then you look at the Last Judgment, and I like drama, so I love the Last Judgment because of the drama, right? These guys are going to hell. These guys are going to heaven. Jesus is there with this. He is ruling over the whole thing, and it's just incredibly powerful. So yeah, I'm not putting that anywhere near in my home. I'm not interested in contemplating the Last Judgment more than a few times in my life, outside of the Sistine Chapel. But I have a huge amount of admiration and appreciation for what's up there. And I'm willing to be in that universe for a few minutes when I go to see the Sistine Chapel. But yeah, I mean, don't stay in the Sistine Chapel for the sake of staying in the Sistine Chapel.
Yeah, I left. I had enough Sistine Chapel.
Yeah, yeah. I've been, I don't know, 3 times, and I'm happy to go again. But I don't know if I ever will go again. But yeah, we all gonna gravitate towards the stuff we like. I probably have a much wider appreciation, partially because I wasn't raised Catholic. I can tolerate the BS more than somebody who was raised Catholic, probably.
Because I imagine for
think
someone
that's
like you,
personal.
it's kind of like Greek mythology is for me. It's like, oh, these are like these fascinating stories
Yeah.
that these people like believe. When you like grew up on it, you're like, this is insane.
Yes, exactly. So I think you have, yes, and that's fine. And just avoid it. Just avoid it. Like
Thanks.
I go and I check out all the, I find the crucifixion of Christ really interesting, right? So, because I like to see how different artists do it and how different periods in art have done it. But I have friends who are like, Yaron, stop it. Like, we'll go to a museum and I'll go and see another crucifixion. Or my wife will say, enough crucifixions, not interested. I don't care. Move on. So I get it. I just find it intellectually interesting. There's not a lot you get out of it, but if from an aesthetic experience, you're not going to get more out of it. But intellectually, it's fascinating. All right, Alejandro. Thanks, Stephen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So, I don't know, you had never talked about this on the show for a while, but there was an article published in the New York Times actually a few months ago, maybe coming up to a year, that was titled, I believe, it was titled How Extremist Jewish Settlers Took Over Israel, and it had spurred the Biden administration to impose sanctions on these settlements in the West Bank. And I guess my question is, I mean, I think this would be appropriate, but I don't know what your thoughts are. And the impetus for me asking this question would be that, as I think I've said before, that I'm very supportive of the Israeli state. But I was at dinner with one of my friends the other day, and he said that I'm whitewashing the negative sides of Israel, or when I talk about it, I am saying, for example, it's a liberal Western democracy, and I'm feeding people who are already supportive of the Israeli state. Like, I'm deluding them in a sense and making them think it's a perfect place when it's not. And I guess, and even when we talk about, it's very demoralizing to see that the only people that would agree with us, maybe a little bit, are these people that, these fanatics like ARU, not ARU, the Ayn Rand Center UK had Moshe Feiglin on, and he was talking about how you need a metaphysical revolution. And I hate to bring this up because I don't know, but I do believe I saw a video of you endorsing him one time, and I wondered what that was all about when he sounded a little insane. I don't know.
Feigelin's nuts. Feigelin's nuts. He's a religious fanatic, and he is very good on economic issues. He's very good on economic issues, and he's very good on fighting wars, on Israel defending itself and how to defend it. But he is also a religious fanatic, and I've always said that And I don't remember ever endorsing him or his party. He actually came and met me at the Ayn Rand Institute years ago, trying to get me to endorse him, and trying to see how I could help him with it. And a friend of mine who's an objectivist was part of his political party, and she was number 3, I think, on his list. And there was a moment there before that election where they thought they were going to get in and she would become a member of parliament. But they didn't. They didn't get enough votes. So I might have endorsed it because of her and the possibility she would get in. That's Libby Molad. But I would never endorse. I never liked him, and he always creeped me out because of how crazy religious he is. I mean, his first thing he wants to do is build a temple on the Temple Mount. He wants to build a 3rd Jewish temple. I mean, he is all out messianic Jewish nuts. And I think I agree with you. There's a certain level of discomfort when you defend Israel, because you know that when you're defending Israel, there's a certain portion of that population that you don't want to defend. They are nuts. They're really, really bad. But you have to remember context. The context is Hamas. The context is the Palestinians who want to annihilate the place. And Feiglin and the rest of the religious nuts are a minority. They're given way too much political power by Netanyahu. It's one of the things that I hate about Netanyahu and why I've opposed him all these years, is because he gives the religionists much more power than they deserve and than their vote deserves, their percentage in the population deserves. And I think that, but even so, I think you have to be careful when you support Israel. You have to be able to say it's not a perfect state. There are real problems there, and if the religionists come up, you have to denounce them, and it is important to denounce them. And and then when they do crazy stuff like go into Palestinian villages and burn cars and stone people or even kill people, as sometimes they have, they need to be denounced and condemned. And I think they always should be. But again, that is not anywhere near a majority of Israelis. It's not even a majority of religious people in Israel. A majority of religious people in Israel do not support that behavior. It is a small group of nuts who are overrepresented in the Israeli government because of the particular way Israeli politics functions. And even when they're overrepresented, they're somewhat marginalized, right? So yeah, it's tricky. This is the problem of the West generally. I mean, when you defend the West today is such a mixed bag. It's got so much bad in it. Are you defending it? Are you defending the bad as well? When we all are patriotic Americans and we're defending America, does that mean we're defending the student protests and the woke and the religious nuts and the Tucker Carlsons and all of that? No, we're defending the basic fundamentals. We're defending the for the most part the day-to-day stuff that not the crazy extremes. And I think that's true of Israel. Israel should be. I mean, think about how many nut cases there are in America. America's filled with complete nutty people with nutty ideas. We don't condemn America for that. Israel has its share of nutty people, left and right, more right in Israel than left. We can't condemn the whole state because of that. And then we also have to remember who they're facing and who they're fighting against and how crazy those people are.
So I was just going to say, so Ted Cruz made a big deal on the Senate about the sanctions, and he really pushed for the lifting of the sanctions on those people. Yep. And it ended up happening. And yep. I mean, I was demoralized when I saw that, but I don't know if you.
Well, and the reason for that is pretty straightforward. The American evangelical community is very, very close to the crazy, nutty religious right in Israel. The evangelicals support the West Bank settlements. They support the people who live there. They support what they do. And of course, Ted Cruz, as long as with a lot of Republicans, are completely dependent on the evangelical vote. Who was it yesterday? Who did I see do this? I think it was J.D. Vance. who basically said only people who are really pro-Israel, I think it was Vance, only people who are pro-Israel are the evangelicals, the traditional Catholics, and something about this administration. The Israel has to realize that its biggest enemies are American Jews, and it's evangelicals who are their friends. Yeah, but the evangelicals are friends of a particular type of Israelis, though in many respects the worst kind of Israelis. But the Republican Party is beholden to them, so that's why they're going to lift those kind of sanctions. Not that I necessarily think that sanctions like that are appropriate, right? I don't know that America should have ever had sanctions on those people, but because it seems weird to me to say we're Israel's best friend, but we're going to sanction a few people within Israel. That seems weird. But I understand what you're saying, and I basically agree with you. All right, Bruce.
Finally, I got out of the bad audio environment.
Okay, good.
So I was wondering if you'd gotten a chance to see the Dylan biopic, A Complete Unknown.
I have not, unfortunately, no. It's on Netflix, right?
I'm not sure. I saw it in the theater, so.
Okay. I'll have to check. I'll check it out if it's streaming. I don't think I probably won't see it in the theater. So when it arrives to a streaming platform, I'll see it.
Good news. What are your thoughts on Dylan's? So one of the things you notice or at least I noticed in the movie was Dylan plugs himself into essentially a community of leftists and seems to resist becoming a leftist himself. Is that something that you've noticed in his career at all? Or?
I mean, what I've noticed is that Dylan avoids taking a stand. He's generally anti-establishment. His music is anti-establishment, pro kind of youth rebellion, pro individual rebellion. But he's and he was certainly associated with the left in the 60s. But he has bounced around. I mean, he became Jewish, and then he became non-Jewish, and he had a bar mitzvah at the Wailing Wall, and he didn't have, he's all over the place, and he doesn't have a ideological home, and he's just bounced around ideologically. But Dylan's music that had the most impact was his music in the 60s and 70s. And it was clearly music of the student rebellion, even if he didn't want to associate with them necessarily directly. The music was their music. It was, and it comes from a perspective of angst and a perspective of challenging the status quo and everything like that. Oh, I'm told that what I said earlier about who's friends and who's not to Israel was not J.D. Vance. It didn't seem right completely that it was J.D. Vance. It was too explicit. Although Vance, I think, thinks it was Steve Bannon, and it would be Steve Bannon because Steve Bannon has no problem saying what everybody else is thinking on the right. So, I mean, I like Dylan. I certainly liked him when I was a teenager. He speaks to being a teenager, particularly if you had a teenage years of angst, and I think almost everybody has teenage years of angst, trying to fit in, trying to figure out what you are. How does it feel to be a Rolling Stone? I mean, it's. I think his songs are powerful, but they were used by the left, and I don't think he had a problem with that back then. But he has bounced around ideological all over the place, and I'm not sure he ever found a place. I don't think he has an ideology. I think he just sings. Art comes from a deeper place than your explicit ideology. It comes from your sense of life.
Fair enough.
But I'm curious about the documentary. So,
it's actually a biopic. It's a dramatization, so not a documentary.
Yeah, I definitely want to see it. My teenage years were certainly filled with Bob Dylan's music. So, and I still enjoy it once in a while.
Mine too.
All right. let's see. Okay, let's go super chat, and then we'll do a lightning round with the panel. Short questions. All right, Shazbot. Should Indiana Jones be recast or laid to rest? If recast, should he be fighting Iranians instead of Nazis? No, I definitely think he should be fighting Nazis. Nazis have become in vogue these days. It's become cool to be a Nazi. I mean, you saw Bannon salute at CPAC. Then another guy got up on stage at CPAC and kind of made fun of the whole thing and kept doing Nazi salutes throughout his talk as if to make fun of the interpretation of it. But it's not funny. So being a Nazi is in vogue. He should be fighting. He should be fighting Nazis. I think Indiana Jones should be laid to rest. I think one of the biggest problems in Hollywood is a lack of originality, a lack of imagination, a lack of new stories. Enough with Indiana Jones. It was great. Loved the franchise. Harrison Ford was phenomenal in it. It was an ideal role for him. Move on. The same is true of Star Wars and all the others. Enough with the superheroes, or at least invent a new superhero. Like, I've seen these superheroes a million times. It's boring. So let's have some new stories with new heroes, with new ideas. I'm not for casting somebody new as Indiana Jones. It'll never be the same. Harrison Ford was the ideal Indiana Jones. I mean, and the same with Bond. Enough Bond. We've done Bond. It was great. It's been great. It's great to see all the different Bonds. But okay, I mean, it's boring. There's a supervillain. Bond will defeat him at the end. Okay, what else? And he'll say a few lines that we all recognize as James Bond. So I'm just not a fan of repetition. Michael, even in an objectivist, will there still be a country bumpkins, people who just take up space? You're pretty cool, Michael. Yes, I think there will always be country bumpkins, even in a objectivist world. They might be better country bumpkins than they are today, because they'll just be elevated by the culture around them. But just like the country bumpkins today are probably better than country bumpkins were in the Middle Ages, but they'll still be there. Harper Campbell, looks like we'll descend into quasi-fascism over the next 20 years, but in 50 years, we'll hit objectivism. Well, we won't hit objectivism. We'll have to work hard to get objectivism, which is not going to just hit it. But yeah, it's hard for me to argue with the idea that we're becoming quasi-fascist in the next 20 years. Whether we can make it an objectivist world in 50, I don't know. Partially would depend on how brutal the quasi-fascists are in stamping us out. Right? To what extent will they try to stamp us out as objectivists? Will they view us as a real threat? Okay, Michael, Hamas always attacks Israel, but North Korea never attacks South Korea. Both communism and Islam are life-hating philosophies, but communism seems less suicidal for some reason. Yeah, I mean, communism is certainly less suicidal because it's this worldly in a sense, right? It's in a sense, it doesn't believe in an afterlife. There's certain advantages to being an enemy of an ideology that doesn't believe in afterlife. They don't think the 72 virgins. Sacrifice is much more real to them. It's about losing your life right here, and there's nothing else to replace it. They have to be more attached to reality in some sense. Islamism, Christianity, and Judaism, in their messianic forms, in their religious fanatic forms, are brutal and suicidal and crazy. And you have to be very, very careful. People who kill in the name of God are more brutal than anybody else. Maybe with the exception of the Nazis, but Nazis, had a certain. I'm not sure Nazis gave up on the afterlife really. But yeah, I mean, if you read about wars of religion, I mean, Hamas has nothing on the wars, the 30-year war or the Crusades. The Crusades were not only to capture Jerusalem and in the Middle East. But the Crusades also were launched in Scandinavia to convert the pagans to Christianity. They also called the Crusades the efforts to take back the Iberian Peninsula. Those were brutal wars. Islam has been unbelievably brutal, mainly in India, in their fights in the East. Less so, interestingly enough, in their battles in the West. And God, have you ever read the Old Testament? Can you think of a people more brutal than the Jews of the Old Testament? Commanded by God himself, being told to kill every man, woman, child, and beast, so not a seed among them will remain. The Jews at some point, they're told to kill every man, woman, and child, and they come back with children and women and children. And Joshua, I think their leader, says, "I told you to kill everybody. What are you bringing these people back?" And he says, "Okay, you can take the you can take the females as your sex slaves, and you can make the boys your slaves. Okay, I'll give you that, right?" So, I mean, these people were nuts, barbarians. So, religious wars are the worst. And Hamas is a religious war. They do it in the name of religion. Everybody ignores that and doesn't want to talk about it. But Hamas is a religious entity focused on religiosity. It's a religious war for them. Hopper Campbell, do many, if not most people, feel miserable and they don't even know they're miserable because they've never felt good, happy? I think to some extent that's true, or many people are just numb. It's not that they feel miserable, but they don't feel joy and happiness, not on a regular basis. It's exception for them. Not your average algorithm. TDS, Trump devotion syndrome. I think I like zombie better. I think Trump zombie syndrome is better. Devotion captures it, but it's I don't know. I like zombie. I can just see the zombies marching. Yeah, mindless zombies. Michael, is Hamas emboldened to do these stunts on camera because they know Trump has neutered Israel? He cares more about publicity to get from the releasing hostages to actual justice. No, I think Hamas is emboldened because they know Israel has neutered Israel. I don't blame Trump for this. This is Israel's fault. This is the Israeli public demands the hostages be brought out. It's the Israeli government that was going to give in whether Trump was going to or not. Trump pushed them and got them to do it maybe faster and more aggressively. But this is Netanyahu and the Israeli people themselves. This is what they want. Liam, did you? Yep.
I was just wondering, on the topic of kind of zombie syndrome and Israel, with Elon constantly tweeting this crazy stuff. Recently, he just posted something like he's blaming kind of Zelensky for the war. Yep. What do you think is going through? These are smart people. What is going through their brains that they can clearly see that Israel, when there's deaths in Palestine or in Gaza, they rightly blame Hamas, but then when it's turned around and Russia's invading Ukraine, they're like, "Oh, this is Ukraine's fault."
It's the fact that they view Putin as a good guy, and I really do think they view Putin as a good guy. We know that Elon Musk has had phone conversations with Putin over the last few years. I remember the first time that Elon came out with kind of a anti-Ukraine perspective. It was right after Jordan Peterson did that video where he defended Putin and claimed that Putin was the true representative of the West, and that fighting Putin would be a civil war within the West. That we need to solve this. I mean, really, if you look at the intellectual origins of the current MAGA perspective on the war, the most sophisticated version of it, and the one that seems to be dominating, is Jordan Peterson's. I did a video on this when he first came out with this thing. It's when he predicted oil would go to 300, and I made fun of that, and I turned out I was right and he was wrong. So it's this idea, you know, it's this idea that Putin is really the West partially because he hates the left so much, and because he's religious. Even though Elon's not religious, he views religion as important for Western civilization. It's important for civilization. He has said that he's like a lot of other people, culturally religious, if you will, except when it comes to having children with many wives. I guess that's more Muslim. So I think it's that perspective rather than. I think they also hate weakness. Russia's strong, Ukraine is weak. Although I think it's the other way around. I view Russia as weak and Ukraine is strong, but they view Russia strong, Ukraine weak. Europe is weak. They hate Europe. Europe is left. Europe is weak. So Europe is bad. Russia is right. Russia is strong. So yes, Putin shouldn't have invaded. He really shouldn't. Jordan Peterson said this in his video. Russia shouldn't have invaded, but he did. So now we have to cut a deal. We have to have peace. We have to do something. But that's what's that?
Elon specifically just baffled me because he's the one literally putting Starlink, helping the Ukrainians fight this war against the Russians.
Yeah, but
and then at the same token, he's blaming them for like the deaths of this war. And I'm like, and I've seen him think clearly on the topic, blame Hamas with like the Gaza situation.
Hamas is clearly religion and it's clearly evil in Islam. Hamas is clearly not Western civilization. Russia, for them, clearly is Western civilization. Therefore, Russia's good. Now, the fact that he gave them Starlink is, I think, at the beginning of the war, he was enthusiastic about this David standing up to Goliath, and he supported Ukraine, and he gave them Starlink. And then I think he got influenced. This is about the same time that he started getting influenced by these right-wing thinkers, by Jordan Peterson and the people around him, Rogan and all the rest of them, maybe even Lex. And he became increasingly less pro-Ukraine, more pro-Russia. And the more pro-Russia he became, he couldn't just pull Starlink. That would be a PR disaster that even Elon couldn't really probably withstand. So he kept Starlink, but his allegiance clearly shifted towards Putin. And then, just yesterday, I read news stories saying that as part of the negotiations now, basically the United States has told the Ukrainians that if they don't sign the mineral deal, and if they don't accept this peace negotiations that Trump is doing, then Elon is going to pull Starlink from them. And they will have no ability to communicate on the battlefield. And that will kill them. That will be the end of them. And they know that. So I think he's willing to pull Starlink in favor of Russia, because I think he is now completely bought into Russia is the West, and with all its flaws, we must protect them, because the real enemy is globalism. The real enemy is all these package deals, globalism, the left, Europe, all of that. That's the real enemy. And I think he's bought into it. I think he's hook, line, and sinker bought into it. As smart as he is, he's at some level emotionally a little child, and you can see that in how he's posting on Twitter. And he's on drugs. There's no question he's on some upper that keeps him going. I don't think he'd do what he does if he wasn't on drugs. And who knows what's that doing to his brain right now. My best. All right, Liam. Did you see Trump back and forth with the governor of Maine at the press conference yesterday? He has this knee-jerk New York mob boss mindset that he defaults to when challenged. Absolutely. I mean, that's who he is. He's a New York, thug. It's what he's always been. It maybe works pretty well in real estate. Probably not the best character. I mean, this is how he's treating everybody around the world. He is a bully. And he's making America a bully. And there will be long-term geopolitical consequences to America becoming a bully around the world. China's a bully. Russia's a bully. And he envies that. He wants America to be a bully as well. Enric, a parallel for the USA when the South challenged the North with expanding slavery, the US confronts the choice of who it is. I'm missing this. A parallel for the USA when the South challenged the North with expanding slavery. The USA confronts the choice of who it is with Trump. It's definitely, I don't know if it's a parallel, but there's definitely is a major decision that in a sense America has to come to of who are they, given Trump. Thomas says, hey, Yaron, panel and chat, what sleep strategies did you try when you had a newborn? My wife and I are thinking of splitting the night 4 hours each. When we had a newborn, it was fairly easy because I was in grad school, and I'm a night person anyway, and I do all my work best at night. So basically, I would be up from 11 to 4 in the morning or 3 in the morning, and she would sleep, and then I would go to sleep, and she would be awake. And both my kids breastfed, so my duties between 11 to 4 a.m. would be to baby would cry, take him to be breastfed, take him back to bed, so the back and forth, and then she would take over once Eric came and went away. I guess just to ask that about Hamas, about Elon Musk. So yeah, I mean that's how we split it. And I worked at night. I wrote my dissertation when our second kid was born. I was in my PhD program, so I was working at night. And in those days, I liked to work at night. Not anymore. Can't handle it anymore. Wyatt, you've warned of not changing our view of things like how bad crime is based on who won, yet it is possible you've been catastrophizing more lately. No, I mean, not at all. Trump is worse than what I've been portraying him to be. I mean, I really make an effort to tone it down a little bit because I know you guys are so sensitive. But what Trump has just done with Ukraine, the way he did it, even I didn't think he would be that bad. It was worse than what I expected. It was generally in the direction I expected, but I didn't think he'd be this explicit about it. I don't think crime has increased because Trump is in office. Crime has stayed pretty much the same and is still on a downward decline. I do think the economy has gotten a little worse because of what Trump's doing with tariffs. Tariffs generally, economists acknowledge, are really, really, really bad incentives. I also think people are confused about what the budget is going to be and everything else. But I've said, if he deregulates, that'll take a lot of the sting out of the tariffs. But it still won't be good because we'll still have the uncertainty around the tariffs. And I've complimented him on his DI policies and on the executive order about centralizing the agency stuff. So no, I don't think there's any catastrophizing here. I do think, and part of it, I think part of it is I'm just being consistent, right? I predicted this would be what Trump did, and this is what Trump is. So I'm consistent, and I'm being consistent, I think. Anyway, no, I don't think so. But you guys have to judge if I'm being objective or not, whether you want to listen or not. Iyaz says, and what will be the language of a European federation? Oh, obviously English. What other language could there be? English is the only worthwhile language in the world for actual communication, for business, for stuff like that. And then you can have French for romance and German for the military. Military should be in German. The entire European military should speak German. I'm kidding. Italian and French and for romance, and I don't know. The standard, there should be a standard language. It should be English. But beyond that, I'm sure people will find ways to communicate and preserve their local languages for the next 100 years. But I'm one of those people who believes that languages should die. Who the F cares? You only reason to know French is today to communicate in France, but it's to read Hugo in original, and to read certain poetry and novels in the original. But languages die, and a lot of European languages do die. What's the value of Hungarian, with all due respect, or Polish, or I mean, I'm thinking of the periphery countries. I mean, Germany created real culture, France did, Italy did. Netherlands is too small to count. I mean, really, we don't need Dutch. Do we need Danish? Do we need Swedish? Do we need Norwegian? Finnish. That should be, I mean, it should be English with maybe German and French. That's it. 3 languages. I'm kidding. I have no idea what the official language should be. I'm partially kidding. I do think English should be the universal language ultimately. But, the idea that some languages will disappear does not bother me. Nathan, I don't understand your reason for thinking there are too many small countries. Isn't the US better off with 50 state governments, and isn't Europe better off for the same reason? No, I don't think Europe is better off. Again, I think Europe could be a federation like the 50 states. I mean, imagine the US was 50 different countries with some vague affiliation like the EU. It would be much worse off than having 50 states in one federal government with one foreign policy and one overarching central government protecting individual rights. And I think Europe ultimately would be better off if it was one big bloc. And certainly, from the perspective of military, it would be a huge advantage. But I think it would also be a huge advantage to have one system of law. Even in the U.S., the fact that we have 50 different regulatory agencies regulating health insurance is not a good thing. The fact that insurance is regulated at the state level is horrible. The fact that banking was regulated at the state level, for many in the 19th and early 20th century was not good, did real harm to America. Could have been much richer if not for that. We would have had a healthier banking system. So there are advantages to federalism, but there are also disadvantages to federalism. And the weaker you make, and if you make the federal government so weak, as in a sense the EU is, as to not have one foreign policy and one, the things that are federal, then you're weakening it. So I don't see the point. What is the point of Montenegro? Why have a country called Montenegro? I've been to Montenegro 2 times now, 3 times. 500,000 people. What's the point? Because they are a different tribe than, I don't know, the French and the Germans and the Italians, the different tribe in some 500 years ago. Who cares? What difference does it make? So I don't see the advantage in fragmentation. I mean, and if you're going to fragment, then how about the city-state? Maybe that's what we should go back to, is city-states, powerful city-states. And I would say there was a certain advantage of fragmentation in Europe when Christianity was dominant during the Middle Ages and Dark Ages, Middle Ages, and into the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. There was a certain benefit of fragmentation. There was no political power strong enough to suppress the new ideas. And if one place they were suppressing new ideas, you went to another place. You escaped to Amsterdam, or you went to Florence and left Rome, or you went to Venice, or you went somewhere. You could move around. But once good ideas come to the forefront, fragmentation is a disaster. I know the libertarians, particularly Hoppe, have a very, very different idea. Hoppe would like to return to the city-state. I think that's anarchy and barbarism. There were more wars back then, many more wars. One of the reasons we don't have wars between states, other than the Civil War, is because we have a strong federal government and strong federal law that unite us, and that's an advantage. And Europe should have the same thing. So I don't think Europe shouldn't have state control in the sense of federalism. I'm for federalism. Every one of the existing countries in Europe, even Montenegro, should be considered a state within a European national federal a European federal government. Lynn, we told gallery visitors that they did not have to wear masks, their choice. Yeah, I mean, it's your decision. And I can completely understand places where they had a different perspective and they told them they had to wear a mask. So, but each one is legitimate based on your values, based on, and you're, imagine if you and Quint were both in your 80s and susceptible to pneumonia. Maybe your attitude towards mask wearing would be different from the perspective of who comes into the gallery. So again, it's context. Context is what should determine how a private business should respond. And that's the beauty of private property. We don't have one universal way in which we respond. Lynn said, we led the charge in fighting the lockdowns and we won. Quint could their fine art. I remember that. You guys were incredibly courageous, insisted on, they stayed open and they told the government to basically come and shut them down. And in the end, the government didn't come and shut them down. So absolutely, it was an incredible, courageous, and absolutely the right thing to do. I mean, that's the point. The response to one thing the government ignored, a number of things the government ignored in lockdowns, and generally the response to the pandemic, they ignored property rights and they ignored individual values. And those should be the things that dictate your behavior and individual behavior during a pandemic. All right. Sir Bixon Cole, really enjoyed Heinous Bosch, dark, mostly religious, but the drama portrayed is stunning. Oh, Bosch. Yeah, I don't like Bosch. It's too much going on. It's hard to focus. It's just a million things happening in the painting. It's the opposite of Caravaggio. Your eye doesn't know where to go. It's all over the place. But I understand the appeal. It's crazy stuff. Those paintings are completely insane. If you stand in front of one, it's like, what is going on here? But I don't find them that dramatic because the style is not dramatic. The style is kind of naturalistic with the story is dramatic, but it also is overwhelming in how many details it has. Lynn says, Reese Sistine Chapel, watch the Agony and Ecstasy. Or better than watching the Agony and Ecstasy, better than watching the Agony and Ecstasy, read the book. The book is excellent, better than the movie, more focused on the entire Michelangelo's life. It is a phenomenal book. It's one of my favorite books of all time. The Agony and the Ecstasy by, I forget his name. Somebody will remind me. But it's a good movie, a great book. Arum says, I'm putting The Fallen Angel by Cabanal on my wall. Beautiful painting and will trigger religious friends, family who visit. I love Cabanal. He's one of my favorite French paintings. I have somewhere on the wall here. I'm pretty sure I have it on the wall. Is Birth of Venus. If I don't have it here, I had it in my previous place. Birth of Venus, which is at the d'Orsay gallery. But yeah, Cabanal is one of my favorite 19th century French painters. So Irving Stone, thank you. Irving Stone, The Agony and Ecstasy. Linda says she's read it 3 times. I believe it. It's such an inspiring, amazing, non-modern, romantic portrayal of Michelangelo's life. I don't think his life was actually the way it's portrayed in Agony and Ecstasy. I think he makes him out to be, in some respects, I think, different than what he was. But it's still an amazing book. Maybe not as accurate as if you want to read a pure biography, but it's a novel. It's not a biography. And it's an amazing book. Irving Stone, I really loved it. Okay, Nate, and then we'll go back to panel. Can you speak a little bit on how activists takeovers are good for corporate governance of a company? I know it's an in-depth topic, but appreciate if you can speak a little on it now. Thanks. A little bit on how activist takeovers are good for corporate governance. Oh, yeah. I mean, the reason they're good for corporate governance is that they keep the CEO on his toes. And they keep the CEO focused on shareholder wealth maximization. Because if the CEO doesn't maximize shareholder wealth, let's say he maximizes DEI or he maximizes his own pocketbook, then the share price will reflect that. The value of the stock will decline. A external investor will look at it and say, huh, if I took the company over and got rid of DEI and got rid of this crazy compensation package the CEO has, I could make a huge amount of money off the stock. Because the stock is down, it could be up because I could make it more efficient and more productive. Let me take it over and do that. So the very fact that somebody could do that keeps the CEO on his toes. Of course, not today, because today we have all kinds of laws against this. And the fact that it gets done takes an inefficient company and turns it efficient. Now, here, the best concretization of this ever is the movie Other People's Money, which is a brilliant portrayal of exactly this, of exactly how, what do you call it, hostile takeovers increase value. And by increasing value, also are good for corporate governance because they force the company to maximize shareholder wealth. That is a short answer. I could go on for well over an hour with examples and everything, but watch Other People's Money. And if you have any questions after that, you can come back. Okay, let's do this. Let's do it a quick round of our remaining panel. Adam, you can go first.
I recently went on a tour of a new manufacturing business here in Torrance. It's called Hadrian. They manufacture precision parts for all kinds of businesses that need very high precision instruments, such as medical, military, and so on, communications. What is interesting is that they have two production lines. Each production line is served by two robots. Those are humanoid-style robots, although they move on fixed rails along the assembly lines. And each of the two sections of the factory are supervised by one technician, and there are 8 milling machines, 8 high-precision milling machines in each section that would, in the old economy, each be served by a technician dedicated to that machine. Now we have one technician who's responsible for the whole section.
Think about all the jobs being destroyed.
Well, I think one of the things that I'm doing right now is investing in private education companies that train robotics technicians, because we will need many, many of them in the future. I also wanted to bring up the fact that one of my favorite Israelis, Johnny Sruji, who's an Israeli Arab who is in charge of hardware at Apple, incorporated a neural network processing unit in the M4 that you now have in your iPhone.
Yep.
And it's just waiting for artificial intelligence applications that will run locally on the phone.
Yep. The future is very bright. If we look at the technology world, there's some amazing innovations, amazing progress. The robots are only going to get better. The Chinese are now building robots. I think they build like 50% of all the robots in the world. And the robots are getting much more human-like. They can do precision things, which they couldn't in the past. The revolution is coming if we allow it to happen. But it really is. It really is amazing, both AI and robots, and we combine AI with a robot, you get an amazing impact.
And one thing that I need to say good about California is that the technology and innovation industry is not regulated.
Yep. California knows where the golden goose comes, or where the golden egg comes from, and has left the technology goose mostly alone. Mostly, it has not tried to regulate it. That is true. Although it has the AI law that is pretty bad, but he vetoed it. The governor vetoed it, and he vetoed it because he knew that he would lose. They would lose companies. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, I think Newsom is not as bad a politician as he is sometimes portrayed in the right-wing media.
Yep, probably true. Thanks for bringing in some positives. That's great. Okay, Steve.
First, you did a talk. Alejandro asked about comparing, like talking about Israel and the Palestinians, and I think you did a talk here in Austin where you had a very visceral and simple framework for um, evaluating Israel and
Yep.
Gaza. I don't know if that's online somewhere, but if it is, it's
online.
like,
It is
yeah.
online.
So Alejandro, watch that. It's very good. My question is about how on earth did we get to the place where we're about to start try to take people's minerals in Ukraine? Like, how does anyone think that this is going to work? Like, when Putin takes the minerals, are we going to invade Ukraine? Like, when we're building our Gazan condos, like, what is going to happen? I thought everyone would have learned after the last 25 years that we should not be wandering around the world doing it, and getting involved in different conflicts. And this almost strikes back to like the late 1800s, early 1900s, when America went to like a phase of like, let's colonize things.
Yep.
That also didn't go well. But how did we get to we want to steal Ukraine's minerals?
I mean, it's Trump's. Trump said, it's Trump's pragmatism. There's no principle involved. There's no, and it's the voters' pragmatism, and it's Trump zombie syndrome, where his supporters are going, yeah, bring all the troops home. We don't want to get engaged in the war, but yes, let's take the minerals and let's build Gaza. And it's mindless. But this is what authoritarians do. This is like what China's been doing all over Africa and all over the world, right? The Silk Road initiative that the Chinese have been engaged in. And Trump is just jealous. He's jealous of, empire. He's jealous of these other countries. He really wants an American empire. He's jealous of Putin. I don't understand how anybody takes it seriously. It is insane. What does it even mean? Most of it is not doable. Really, what are you going to do? What are you going to do in Gaza exactly? And what's so unique about the Gaza coast that you're going to build? I mean, it's just the whole thing is just floating out of nowhere. Why would anybody want to go on vacation to Gaza when there are other places that are just as nice? And where are you going to put the people, and who's going to take them, and why would they want them, and a million other questions. But it's just pragmatism, unconnected to any principle, any knowledge of history, any bigger vision. There's no vision. I don't know if you put it to a vote in American, how many Americans would actually want this. I still think it would lose in a vote because I think Americans are more realistic than Trump is. But there's a huge contingency that's like, yes, America shouldn't be involved in the world unless it's Trump. And then it's okay for America to be involved in the world.
I would have agreed with that before this whole Greenland thing happened. But you run into a surprising number of people who are like, oh, yeah, we should definitely take Greenland. It sounds great. And they're not like I'm in tech. So these are not like people that are just like stupid people. Like these are like engineers who are like, oh, yeah, great plan for Greenland.
I mean, we bought Alaska from the Russians. I mean, theoretically, we could buy it from Denmark. I mean, it's not completely nutty to assume we could do that. So I don't view just buying Greenland and doing it in a friendly way as necessarily a bad thing. It's the idea that we're going to invade Greenland. We're going to take it from, we're going to go to war over Greenland, which is just ludicrous. But I don't know. I don't know. Trump, by saying stuff out loud, is bring, people think, oh, yeah, okay, why not? And they can't think beyond, they don't think beyond that. In politics, even smart Silicon Valley people, and it's true of all of them, almost, they don't think well when it comes to politics. They're smart people when it comes to tech and to their job and what they're doing, but they're not very good when it comes to politics. They don't really have an idea, and they don't know anything about the world. A lot of them are very naive about the world, and they just don't know how the world runs. Yeah, this is the thing. It's hard to explain irrationality. So, we can try, but it's hard. All right, Bruce. Oh, I went out of order, but that's okay.
What's likely up next with Iran? They seem to think that they've got something new that they can threaten Israel with, and to all indications to me are that they're raving naked on the street, and no matter what they do, Israel's in a position to just smack them down completely.
Yeah, Israel's in a position, but they won't do it. I don't have any information about this, but I strongly believe that the Trump administration is negotiating with Iran somewhere. They're sitting down with the Iranians and they're cutting a deal. It turns out, by the way, that the Trump people have been negotiating with the Russians, with Putin, since November in Switzerland. There have been meetings between Trump aides and Putin aides to set up that phone call and to set up the framework of what happened in Saudi Arabia. I think the same thing is happening with Iran. I think that's why it's so quiet. Trump is not saying anything. They're not saying anything because I think it's all being negotiated right now. So I think we're going to have a deal. I think it'll be tough on their nuclear program in a sense that there'll be a lot more supervision, but I think it'll also free up oil and make them a lot richer than they are today. Just like the first thing Trump wants to do is eliminate sanctions on Russia, which will make Russia a lot richer, so that they can build the weapons to attack their neighbors, so that Iran can build the nuclear weapons when they decide they want them, or they can build other forms of weaponry that they can attack Israel with. So, but that's Trump, right? See, I'm trying to be moderate here, and then I'm accused of being catastrophizing Trump. But he's doing this. This is happening. And if they're not negotiating right now, call me on it on a show like in a few months. If Trump and Israel bomb the Iranian nuclear facilities, I give you every permission to come on here and say, Yaron, you screwed up. You didn't see it coming. You misspoke. That's fine.
That won't be me that
I'm
does
happy
that.
to be wrong about. What's that, Bruce?
It won't be me that does that.
No, but there are people eager, waiting for it. But the amazing thing is that it almost never happens. I mean, please tell me when I'm wrong. If my predictions don't come true, where are all the people who are saying, Yaron, you've been wrong, you've been wrong, you've been wrong? I saw one who was close on this. One on YouTube in the comment section said, Yaron, you always said the Russians are weak and they have a terrible military, but look, they're winning. Yeah, and that their military is really, really bad and really, really horrible. And if you throw enough soldiers into the battlefield, then yes, you won't lose. But I wouldn't say they're winning. By any measure, they're not winning. They have about the same amount of land of Ukraine now as they did 3 years ago, and or 3 years and 3 months. And they can't sustain this. And the only reason they will win is for two reasons. One is because the West won't support Ukraine the way they should. And second, because Trump is going to hand them Ukraine on a silver platter. So otherwise, no, the Russian military is still awful. All right, Alejandro.
So there was a thing when Elon Musk bought Twitter. He did the loans. So he took out, this was a big thing where you take out loans against your stock and you don't pay taxes. And I know in the ideal world you propose there would be no taxes and all that, but given the fact that we do have an income tax and we do have the system, that seems rather unfair to everyone else that can't do this. And how would one fix it given the constraints of today's world?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask a different question. Yeah, look, corporate debt is tax deductible. Debt is tax deductible at the corporate level, and dividends are not, which creates an imbalance. It creates an incentive for corporations to load up on debt, which I don't think is good, and not pay out dividends, and so it kind of affects what's called the corporate structure, the way corporations raise money, which is not good. The best thing to do would be either to eliminate taxes on dividends in order to equate the two, or to tax interest payments on debt. My favorite solution is to get rid of the corporate income tax altogether and make the whole thing irrelevant. But given that you have the corporations can take on debt that is tax deductible, I have no problem with them doing it. I think it's good for them to do it. It makes complete sense. It maximizes their shareholder wealth. The reality is that Elon Musk couldn't have taken over Twitter without doing it, without taking on a lot of debt. So debt has an important role to play in buying up businesses, and the government favors it right now, which is unfortunate, but it's the reality. So take advantage of it. Why not?
I think you misunderstood the question. It was when there was the individuals borrow against their stock and live off loans. This was the Panama Papers that were revealed when the individuals like that. That was my question.
So individuals borrow money and live.
They borrow the money. I didn't realize this wasn't the CEOs kind of, or a lot of wealthy people, they borrow the money and they live off that, and then they give their stock up as a default and it's none of it's
They don't
taxed.
give up their stock. They keep their stock, but what they avoid by doing that is having to sell the stock and pay capital gains.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think I'm 100% behind that. I see no problem with that. Good for them. I wish I had a lot of money in stocks so I could do the same thing. So I'm all for tax minimization strategies. So I have no problem with that. They pay so many taxes in so many other ways and so many other places that if they can avoid paying taxes on this one thing by doing this, good for them. I'm generally for people finding ways to pay less taxes if they can. And that's completely legal. So if they can do it and abide by the law, then good. You know, ideally, as I've said, we have a flat tax. We have no capital gains taxes. We have either a flat income tax, or we have a flat consumption tax. And none of these strategies matter because everything's simple and straightforward. And it's very easy to calculate your taxes. And there's just no strategies to get around it because there are no deductions, there are no deductibles, there's nothing. But to get there requires a massive change to the tax code, which I don't think anybody's really interested in doing.
It's not just the rich. The middle class version of this is the home equity line of credit, especially if you live in a geo where homes have appreciated a lot.
Yep, that's right. So people take out loans on their homes all the time. They refinance their mortgages all the time, not just lines of credit, but you refinance your mortgage. And the reason to refinance your mortgage, at least up to $1 million, is because you get the interest deductible on it. and you don't have to sell the home and get a capital gain. So it is true middle. Whenever you have something like that, absolutely take advantage of it. So it's a tax code has created all these distortions that incentivize you to buy homes and incentivize you to hold on to stock and not to sell it, which is stupid. Then, follow the incentives. All right, guys. Thank you. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to all the super chatters. I appreciate it. There will be a show in Hebrew tomorrow, and then I'll see you all on Monday. Bye, everybody. Have a fantastic weekend.